Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm speaking to someone who has come up with an idea that is both very simple, but also incredibly well thought through, that solves what I think is a major problem that businesses face. And I'm really excited to share it with you. Before I tell you who she is, some context. If you've been listening to recent episodes of the show, and if you haven't, where have you been? Then you'll know that I'm in the middle of a mini-series exploring diversity, equity, and inclusion. You also know that if those words fill you with dread, then this is the series for you, because my guests think it's time to get rid of the traditional approaches and introduce something much more human. Training that isn't patronizing, stereotypical, or simply ticking the box, but instead helping people of different backgrounds and perspectives to understand themselves better in order to build environments that can work for everyone. In the series opener, I spoke with Morgan Hamill, Chloé Valdary, and Peter Stein. And in the second episode, I spoke with Morgan on her own about moral polarization and the complex challenges leaders face in balancing ethics and business. If you've not heard either of those episodes, I recommend going back and starting there. You'll find links in the show notes, because that sets the tone for the wider conversation we're having in this series. In this episode, I'm continuing my one-on-one discussions with the guests that featured in the opener. And this time round, it's Chloé Valdary, the founder of The Theory of Enchantment, an approach that blends psychology, philosophy, and culture to foster more inclusive, compassionate communities. And if you're wondering why her business has the word theory in it and what enchantment means, then rest assured both of those things are answered in a delightful way. Chloé brings a fresh and thoughtful perspective that challenges traditional approaches to DE&I, bringing attention to the need for deeper self-reflection and understanding of both our light and our shadows. If that sounds a little bit technical, don't worry, because Chloé is one of the most insightful and engaging people I've ever had on the show, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to bring this episode to you. Together, we unpack how her program helps individuals and organizations to culture connection and empathy, leading to more thriving environments. So whether you're in leadership, HR, or just simply curious about the human sides of ethics and inclusion, there's a ton of things that you can take away from this episode. So without further ado, I'm really pleased with this. Here's my discussion with Chloé Valdary on the theory of enchantment. Chloé, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited to have you here. And now normally when I talk to my guests, I get them to introduce themselves. But I think with you, I'm going to flip it around and just go straight in to ask you the theory of enchantment.
Yes.
What is that?
Theory of Enchantment is an inclusion and belonging company that I created in 2018. And we help companies build trust and a space of real compassion so that their employees can get along with each other and provide products and services that serve their community.
Wow. So I want to unpick that, but let's just go through the individual words, because I'm fascinated. And I want to start with the enchantment, because that's such a lovely word. How does that fit in with what you've just said?
So enchantment is about this process for which you open up to yourself and to others. You open up to the complexity that is inherent within your being, that is inherent to what it actually means to be human. Enchantment is distinct from enlightenment. When I think of enlightenment, I think of like the bright light shining down on a person, on the darkness, right? Whereas enchantment is actually about being in right relationship with the darkness and the light, and to understand that darkness does not exist without light. Light does not exist without darkness. And if you can accept your own light and your own darkness, or your own shadow, as the psychiatrist Carl Jung put it, you'll be able to accept that within the other. And if you can respond to your own light and to your own darkness with compassion, you can respond to another person's light and darkness with compassion as well.
And the way that you got into thinking about this is you make links to popular culture,
Yes.
which is not, given what you've just said, that sound, they sort of sound at odds with each other. Can you just talk a little bit what does enchantment mean in the context of sort of popular culture, and how does that link to that?
Well, for example, Disney is probably the most popular brand that markets itself as being obsessed with enchantment. It's a very enchanting company. Its content is very magical, right? Enchantment is a kind of enchanting or magical word. There's a whole movie called Encanto, which means enchantment, in the Disney pantheon. But also, Encanto or cantar means to sing, right? And so there's this idea that all living beings are singing into being And there's something really special about that. There's something really powerful about that. And it's as if we could use pop culture to tune in to that frequency. Because the frequency is always present, it's always alive, but we're not necessarily tuned into it. And pop culture helps us tune in. So what do I mean by this? There's a reason why we gravitate toward films like The Lion King. And we don't just watch films like Beauty and the Beast for pure entertainment, right? Even though we might think we do, we actually there's something deep within the human psyche. There's something deep within the human conditions that makes it so that these films speak to us and resonate with us on a really powerful level because they're sharing or showing something to us about the human condition, about what it means to be human. So Beauty and the Beast, for example, for many, famous Disney films, at least in the 90s when they would come out, the moral of the story is always articulated in the first 5 minutes of the film. And so this is true for Aladdin, it's true for Beauty and the Beast. Go rewatch them, you'll see what I mean. So in the Beauty and the Beast, it starts out where there's this prince, and the prince is very vain and thinks that the image of a person is what matters. It's very interesting, right? Because when we're talking about inclusion and belonging and race, that's what we're talking about. Person thinks that the image of a person is the only thing that matters. So he runs across a woman who's described as an old hag in the forest. He looks down on her, he curses her, and it turns out that this being is actually a princess, and she transforms into a princess in front of his very eyes, and she curses him for the way that he showed up. And she says to him, "The curse will be removed if someone learns to love you." And then the narrator says, "Oh, this is a source of sorrow for this person because now he's a beast, now he's ugly, now he's, decrepit." And then he says, "For who can learn to love a beast?" And that question is actually the moral of the story of Beauty and the Beast. That question invites us to learn how to love our shadows. Again, that question is distinct from enlightenment. It's speaking to enchantment, which is about being in right relationship with both the light and the shadows of one's own being. And of course, the protagonist, Belle, learns to love the beast, which is what ultimately transforms the beast back into a man.
I'm still processing the fact they give the spoiler alert that happens at the beginning, but the more I think about it, you're right. And so what you're doing is saying the reason these grab our attention, the reason they're really, really popular and they're really good at this, and we can watch them time and time again, I guess is the other interesting thing
Yeah.
here, is because it's speaking to us about the human condition, right? We recognize something in that and the rapture and joy that we have of watching this, even when, to your point, we know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're saying there's something in that, right? And we can
Yes.
take that and recognize I guess that's what makes us tick.
Yes.
And therefore that's interesting.
Yes, it's almost as if human beings have an implicit cultural DNA about us that no matter if a certain story is told in a different language, in a different container, in a different context, and we can see how Disney has been doing this actually in the past few years by using its storytelling to highlight other cultures that we may not have been exposed to previously. Moana comes to mind, for example, as representation of Polynesian culture. Encanto, again, another example of that. But no matter what culture Disney is highlighting, there are certain truths that these stories are telling that are fundamental to what it means to be human. And if we can remember that, we can remember that there is something that transcends our differences and transcends our sometimes hyper tribalistic mindset and hyper tribalistic tendencies to go into us versus them mentalities, which is also a part of what it means to be human, right? And I don't want to actually to go back to the concept of enchantment and getting a right relationship with both our light and our shadows. I don't want to demonize that, right? Because that's also a part of what it means to be human. So the question becomes, how can we get in right relationship with that such that we don't manifest it in harmful ways, but we manifest it in more holistic ways?
So that's the enchantment bit.
Yeah.
The of we'll skip, but let's get to theory. What is the theory of enchantment and why is it a theory?
Well, I think that the theory part is more because I'm a nerd and that's sort of my intellectual academic like part of my brain just like especially because I work in the corporate space and I work with companies, my sense is that there can be a hesitation or an allergy to just leading with enchantment. And also more to that point, the theory piece is like, what happens if we use design thinking to take what I just described to build robust products and services, or more specifically, training modalities, and we place them into these corporate contexts to see if they can result in employees not only just getting along with each other better, but being able to navigate conflict in more healthy ways, such that they can build an inclusive space where no matter who you are, where you come from, what your background is, you feel like you belong. Because that's what it's like to actually create a team that's productive and that can produce innovation. Diversity is actually required in order to produce innovation. And recognizing that actually starts with the diversity that every single individual contains, right? And that goes back to that shadow and light paradigm that I spoke about earlier.
And so you're looking at building environments and processes and cultures that are more inclusive, right? This is
Yes.
about getting people. So people put it really simply, because that's how my brain works, right? It's
Yeah.
about people get on with other people and recognize the value in other people and won't display traits like sexism, racism, kind of negativity towards others.
Yeah.
And the way that we do that is that we start to look at ourselves. You get the individuals to focus on themselves.
You get individuals to focus on themselves, to look at themselves in community with other individuals who are also looking at themselves and focusing on themselves. And what that does is that reveals to individuals that the same baggages and the same insecurities that they have are held by other individuals. And that actually creates a bond. That creates trust, that creates connection. So, for example, if a person, and a person would experience this going through some of our programming, if a person realizes that in some contexts they feel defensive, in some scenarios, let's say they feel defensive, and in other contexts they feel in flow, expansive, so on and so forth. But they also recognize that other colleagues in their workplace are dealing with the same issues and feeling the same feelings. They will be more inclined to feel a sense of connection with that colleague that maybe prior to having this experience, there was a lack of trust, or there just wasn't an opportunity to build trust in the first place. This is also true for, if a person is able to recognize that a particular scenario or context makes them feel superior. This is a question that we have, a self-reflection question we have in one of our programs that we have people answer. It's like, right about a time where you felt superior to another person or another group of people. Every human being feels this at some point in their life. This isn't like a thing that only those people over there feel and these people over here in my camp never feel. No, every human being on the face of the earth has felt this feeling, right? And if we can get people to regularly reflect in that way and also see their colleagues reflecting in that way, there will be trust, there will be transparency, there will be open and honest communication, and you'll need that to problem solve, right? It is for the purpose, theory of enchantment is for the purpose of building inclusive society. But why do we want to build inclusive societies? We want to build inclusive societies because building inclusive societies actually helps us problem solve, actually helps us come up with innovative ways of thinking that can solve for the solutions that we need to be solving for today. So, for example, if I'm a very artistic, creative person and I see the world through a very specific set of heuristics and paradigms, and let's say you're a data-driven person and you see the world through a very specific set of paradigms and heuristics, and here I am describing myself and my business partner, Peter, right? It could be the case that at first, when we first come together to work together, I have a bias against you because you're not seeing the world in the way that I'm seeing. And you might have a bias against me because I don't see the world the way that you see it. And that's okay. We can work through that using a lot of these self-reflection questions. But over time, we will actually come to see that the way I see the world complements the way you see the world, and the way you see the world complements the way I see the world, just as darkness and light complement each other, and that the one cannot exist without the other, and the two together actually create beauty and harmony. And so once we are in a way of being, an orientation where we can really see and experience the value of what the other person brings to the table, we can create things that we could not, we could not create in isolation. We could not create only by ourselves. So there's a direct connection between diversity and being able to build solutions for the real problems that we need to solve today in our world.
And I love this because this points towards, why do we employ people? Well, they come with human attributes,
Yeah,
right? So the problems you're talking about, because if you've got tasks that can be done, repeat tasks that can be performed time and time again in exactly the same way, you give that to a machine.
right,
So
right.
we're employing people nowadays to be human. And so the point that you're making is to say, okay, if we're going to be employing human beings, we need to recognize they come with attributes and biases and backgrounds and all those sorts of things. And so we need to maximize the opportunity for those people to be themselves, to get the best out of them. So there's no point in hiring people that seem to be diverse if they can't work together.
Right.
And so what you're doing is, if I looked at it, it's a way of getting from what would be the commercial reason for thinking in these terms. How do I get the best out of, not necessarily the most, this is not about exploiting people, but how do I
Yeah.
get the best out of my human capital, to use a crude term? And the
Yeah.
answer you're saying is that human capital needs to work well. They need to be, I guess there's a lot of what you're saying is sort of comfortable in your own skin
Yes. Very, very
and
important.
comfortable with other people who might see the world differently and have different experiences.
And those two things are interconnected, because if you're not comfortable in your own skin, if I'm not comfortable in my own skin and I'm insecure in my own skin, I will take those insecurities and project them onto you. So there's a direct connection between not being comfortable in my own skin and not being comfortable with the diversity that you present by being in the same organization or being in the same team that I'm on. There's a direct connection between those two things. And in contrast to other diversity, let's say, programs, many of them have historically, since 2020, they've shamed people, right? They have looked down on people for, let's say, having white skin color, to be very frank, right? They've looked down on people for belonging to categories that have historically, let's say, their ancestors, right, did things that were harmful. It is not a good idea to shame people. Why is it not a good idea to shame people? It is not a good idea to shame people because if we understand where, let's say, supremacist ways of thinking come from or superiority complexes come from, they come from an actual experience of shame. What do I mean by that? If I am feeling secure within myself, if I am feeling good within myself, I will not feel the need to tear you down in order to feel good about myself, right? There's again, a direct connection between security and creating an inclusive and belonging society or organization. However, if I don't feel good about myself, for whatever reason, let's say I'm not getting the necessary materials that I need to thrive, the necessary psychological support to thrive, whatever. If I don't have the tools to deal with that insecurity, because I'm not saying we're going to get rid of insecurity, right? Insecurity is a feature of life, and I do think we need to mitigate its byproducts as much as possible, but we will never get rid of it entirely. So if I don't have the tools necessary to deal with that insecurity, again, I will project onto you. So if you shame me, right? If someone shames me, that is producing insecurity. If someone tries to guilt me, that produces a sense of worthlessness in my being. And I'm a human being and I have a fight or flight or freeze portion of my brain that will respond to that by trying to discharge it by projecting it onto you. So it is not a good idea to try to shame and blame and guilt people out of a superiority complex. It does not work.
And so if we looked at this in a scenario that everybody will recognize from their childhood, right? Bullies at school,
Yeah.
right? That is about them and their issues.
Right.
And so the way we resolve, we know that in that, that context is reasonably well understood, right? That kids don't naturally do. There's something wrong with them that leads them to that particular behavior. And of course that carries through into adulthood as well. And you're basically taking that similar principle and saying, we can apply this much more broadly
Yes.
and look at humans in the round and say that because this impacts everybody, we can collectively go through a process where we start to think about these topics and recognize where we all have our insecurities. And so when we're looking at solving the diversity and inclusion challenge, it's everybody in the room, either the physical room or the proverbial room, is going through the same experience. In other words, to put it in really simple, crude terms, is traditional diversity and inclusion approaches would be someone like me, a white middle-aged male, is going to be told that I need to change my behavior.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's a different message for me
Right.
to potentially some of the other people that are in the group with me. And what you're bringing is something that says, actually, this is not about me being treated differently in that room, which goes against the whole diversity and inclusion thinking. It's an exercise we're doing together as opposed to lecturing a subset of the room.
That's right. And we're all going to learn something new about ourselves. We're all going to learn something new about how we respond to insecurity, how we relate to insecurity. We are going to learn how we both have a tendency to project our insecurities onto each other or onto other people, because that is what humans do. And part of the process that we are bringing to the table is first bring awareness to the fact that all human beings do this. It's a function of, again, the fact that we have a fight or flight or freeze brain in our system, our limbic system, right? Which whenever we experience what is a threat or what we perceive as threat, right? We want to move away from the threat as quickly as possible and move away to something that feels good. That part of our brains is millions of years old. The prefrontal cortex, which helps us slow things down, right? And think through things, it's significantly younger than that part of the brain. So we must engage practices that get that part of our brain working more constantly and more consistently. And this is true for all human beings. Again, not only regardless of their skin color, but regardless of what their ancestors did or did not do. And this is something that, like, I cannot stress enough, that is important for us to internalize, because if we don't internalize it, we will end up recreating the conditions that produce superiority complexes in the first place. And it takes a great deal of unlearning to actually come to this, because if I'm walking around internalizing this idea or this aspect of my identity that I am oppressed and you're the oppressor, it actually brings me a great sense of, this is going to be controversial, power to experience myself as oppressed. It gives me an incredible sense of internal power to experience that. And there's nothing I have to do. There's no labor that I need to do. There's nothing that I don't need to like commit myself to creating an inclusive space. Like, I am good as I am, and you have to do everything in order to change the situation. But in fact, of course, that's not true. We need to work together to really understand the awesomeness and the pain and suffering that comes with being a human being. And we need to take responsibility. What does responsibility mean? It means the ability to respond. That's what it means. We need to recognize our responsibility when things arise within us. Like when we encounter conflict where we might feel a certain kind of way, we have choice in how we respond to that conflict, right? Like if you show up in a certain way where I feel small, let's say because you're being flaky or something, and I feel small. Why do I feel small? I feel small because I'm not getting a sense of connection, and I need connection. I'm a human being in order to thrive. So instead of coming to you and saying, "Oh, you oppressor white men have made me feel small," and it's just continuing as, the ancestors continue to do so, I'm going to use nonviolent communication, and I'm going to say, when you showed up in this way, I felt small. Why did I feel small? Because I need connection. I'm wondering what it's like for you to hear that. I'm wondering if we can work together to show up differently, better with each other, and if we can commit to that, right? That's a very different mindset, mentality than always blaming. Brene Brown, famous for her TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability, said that the way that blame is described in sociological research is a way to discharge pain. So trying to move away from that mindset, right? And first of all, we need to recognize it. And also, we need to ask, how can we discharge pain in healthy and holistic ways? The theory of enchantment can help us do that. And by doing so, help us build trust, help us deal with conflict in healthy ways, because conflict is always going to be with us. It's also part of what it means to be human. And if we can do so in healthy ways, we can be productive, we can be innovative, and we can problem solve. And we need to problem solve.
I love this because it's so, you present it with a degree of clarity, which is, you've kind of ironically taken the emotion out of these things and said,
Yeah.
okay, these are the dynamics that are at play. And actually, if we all bring emotional baggage to the table, then that colors the whole discussion. And so it seems to me what you're sort of simply saying is we have to recognize that humans are complex and challenging, and we all bring these things. So if we can sort that stuff out and we can understand a little bit more about who we are and what's driving us and the things that we can fix in ourselves, and everybody does that, then suddenly we create it's a healthier relationship amongst each other.
Yes.
So it's almost it's bringing the benefits of one. Or if I go to therapy, that's beneficial to me as an individual. And so I don't want to describe this as group therapy because it's not that, but you're trying to replicate, I think, if I've understood it right, that dynamic across the entire. So everybody's going through this process, and at the end of it, we've all changed, right? I guess our
Yeah.
outlooks and our approach to things, and that's what creates that healthy environment.
That's right, because you've all gone through this same experience together, right? And so that creates a different identity. That creates a transcendent identity, right? Because you've all experienced this process together. And, we've seen it with our partners where a partner, the managers or the employees were dealing with conflict in a very particular way prior to working with us. And after working with us, they bring these tools into the conflicts that they may have with other managers, other colleagues, and with customers. And it actually makes a difference. They're able to respond to the pain point, let's say in a conflict, instead of responding to all the ways that the person who was experiencing the pain was trying to discharge the pain by blaming them. Right? That's just a simple example, but like think about it. If someone's blaming you for something, and instead of focusing on the fact that they're blaming you, you focus on the pain point and say, how can I be of service as quickly and as efficiently as possible so that I can alleviate the pain and suffering of this person? And that person sees you model that, that's huge. That totally transforms your relationship with that person. And we've gotten that feedback from folks working with, again, both their colleagues and their customers.
And as you talk, I mean, I love the idea, but this requires a little bit of courage, right, on the part of the organizations that work with you. Because one of the reasons those traditional non-solutions, the ones I've been through that I just sort of, like you walk in the room and you think, oh, it's going to be it's going to be a lecture. I'm not, from my perspective, I'm not going to enjoy this.
Sure.
It's ineffective. And we all know it's ineffective on some level, right? Because it's not solving the problems, right? But it's easy for people to do, right? You can sort of put it in a box and go, here's an exercise. Let's just hire someone and we will solve this problem. Job done. Yours requires the organization to have a bit of courage because this is going to be difficult and challenging for people. But it's also stepping into the realm of people's personal lives because you're asking them to talk. Because logically, this isn't just a work-related discussion, right? This suddenly becomes a process where people are bringing their entire. I mean, this is literally bring your whole self to work, right?
Yes.
It makes perfect sense to me because I've never understood this idea that when somebody walks in through a company door or logs onto a system, that they're somehow required to behave differently, right? That they become a different person, right? And of course, we behave slightly differently in that sphere, but you're crossing the work and the personal sphere quite heavily, and so that's quite a big ask.
Well, but it's already crossed, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. The other thing I would say in response to that is like, actually, our program is easier. Because if you take other organizations' programs, the way that you just described them, you will be potentially creating an environment of distrust, which is not going to not only not going to solve for the problems that you're trying to solve for, but will actually make things worse. And our company has been brought in by partners who, thought they were doing the right job by bringing in a traditional DEI program, and in fact made it much worse. And then we're asked to sort of like, sage the place and create a better environment, which we're more than happy to do. But I think in terms of like long-term thinking, it's way easier to bring us in at the beginning instead of engaging in this long process where you bring in a company that you think is just going to check the box, right? But it's actually not only not going to check the box, it's going to open you up for potential lawsuit because you are bringing in a philosophy that says it is okay to discriminate against people based upon their skin color, and that is somehow going to bring about an inclusive culture. Like, that's absurd. And I would also encourage companies to please bring the design level thinking that you are bringing, I assume, to developing your products and services, right? We all know that the way to build a robust line of products and services are to put out a product and service Give it to your customer, constantly survey your customer, iterate on that customer's feedback, create better product and services, right? That is precisely what you should be doing when it comes to inclusion and belonging training. And this is like it's so funny because I'm realizing as I'm saying this out loud that companies, by not understanding that the personal and the business are one, are trying to like take that mentality by bringing in a DEI program that tries to separate like how a person would go about bringing about products and services in an innovative way from this training. It's like, no, you need to take that mindset and apply it to the way that you provide training. Otherwise, what are we talking about? And ultimately, you're trying to invest in your people, right? You're trying to do the same thing internally that you do externally, which is to provide a robust line of services to your people so that they can be strong, so that they can be a team that is equipped to do what they need to do to push the organization forward.
And I think this is fascinating because this points to a dynamic that I see both in the work that I do, but you can also take it across the kind of HR spectrum,
Mm.
which is we wouldn't buy equipment and then set that equipment to do something it's not designed to do, right? And have a sustainable business, right? We would
Mhm.
make sure that we maintain the equipment correctly. We buy the right equipment. We follow the instructions when we use it. We maintain it when we have to. We pay attention to it. And
Mhm.
yet for people, somehow, those laws don't apply. And to your point is the logic that you use in developing business products, which is we need to make sure this actually works and this
Yeah.
actually does what it's supposed and it meets a need and it's well thought through. Because otherwise we don't have a business.
Right.
And yet, and to your point, is that for some reason that gets switched off internally. Oh yeah, just quick fix over here, right? Let's just
Right.
do a quick fix with the people, job done. And so I love the way that you're talking about it because you're sort of going, look, you know this is a problem. And here's an honest way to try and solve it by recognizing the reality, right? We're not putting it in a sort of quick box ticking thing where we move on. We're actually saying, yes, this is difficult, right? But you know
Okay.
it's difficult. And so here's a solution. Here's a solution that is it turns the challenge into a feature, right? So you're opening the box for good reason, right? You're not opening the box to go, look, this is much harder than you
Yeah.
thought. I
Yeah.
don't have a solution. It's let's open the box and say, let's recognize what we're dealing with. And here's an
Mhm.
honest solution to that.
That's right. And to folks who are entrepreneurs, who started their companies, they would ask, like, why aren't you bringing enough an entrepreneurial mindset to this problem? Like, I thought you loved this, but like you loved the challenge, right? That's part of the magic of being an entrepreneur. So come on, let's go.
I love your comment around, yes, you can come in and do the cleanup operation, but wouldn't
Yeah.
it be better if you weren't cleaning up, you were actually solving?
Yeah.
And so when people call you in, what happens there? Because I like the solution that you're proposing, and it's based in science, and it's interesting ideas, and it's also accessible science, right? Because you
Right.
talked about Disney,
Right.
which is fascinating, right? So we're not kind of having. I know from the way you talk, there's clearly academic rigor behind what you say,
Yeah.
but you're presenting, but ultimately what you're putting in front of people is the Disneyfied version of the thing. You're trying to make it accessible to people in
Yeah.
in in that way. What happens? So you go into a company, what happens? How does this work?
So we will work with the company in a myriad of ways. We will either, obviously depending upon the pain points that they bring us. So oftentimes it's either they want to move from a toxic diversity and inclusion program to a program that's closer to our way of being, or they want to firewall their organization, right? So they don't have to play cleanup and ensure that they can create an inclusion and belonging experience that's great from the get go. So we'll probably start with a pilot program that usually looks like a 90-minute workshop with either the people on the executive team, frontline workers, managers, or a combination of all three. And then we will work with them to co-create solutions that, again, meet their pain points. So, for example, the company in California that we've had a long-term engagement with came to us and they said, we want to move our managers from a program or a diversity program that's focused on centering marginalization and oppression, focusing on inclusion and belonging. So we ran a couple of pilots with their managers and their executive team. We also put their managers inside of a year-long training program where they, on a weekly basis, we're going through our content, we're learning skill sets, and they were buddied up. So they actually partnered. We had managers partnering with each other to complete this program. And then they were responding by telling us where they implemented the practices and the skill sets that we were training them through. that was something that we designed in direct response to their pain points. They said that we're at a state of toxicity, and we want to move to a state where people are showing up to work with a sense of not just, inclusion and belonging as a kind of banner headline, but basically where they're in flow, right? Where they're able to be in their own skin and they're able to handle conflict from that vantage point. So we train people. We train people in a different array of modalities that include everything from stoicism, nonviolent communication, being able to do shadow work, which is from the mind of Carl Jung. You can actually bring all these modalities into your engagement with other managers, with customers, so that when they're bringing up pain points that they're dealing with, right, you can respond accordingly in a way that actually directly solves for their pain point. So it's actually kind of a scaffolding flywheel, right? Like people are coming to us with their pain points. We're co-creating models that solve for their pain points, and that create a kind of new way of being, where then they take that way of thinking and way of being, and then they apply it to their manager, they apply it to their customers. So it's scaffold. The other thing I will say is that, Theory of Enchantment has 3 principles. And the purpose you could think of these 3 principles is for anyone who engages in a long-term engagement with us, is for the employees, the management, the frontline workers, the retail team, whatever, to be embodying these 3 principles by the end of the engagement. So those 3 principles are treat people like human beings, not political abstractions, number 1. Number 2, criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down or destroy, especially important when it comes to conflict management, right? And root everything you do in love and compassion, which is about that flow state that you actually end up being in once you've regularly practiced those first 2 principles. So we do 90-minute pilot programs, full day workshops, virtual programs, online coursework programs. But again, we co-create and design these according to the pain point that our partners bring to us.
Which, of course, is in contrast to some of these other traditional methods that are always described it. The alternative way of doing it,
Yeah.
which is one size fits all, right? Where you just roll it out because it's a simple thing that we just want to be tick the box, right? So
Yeah.
they do. So yours is much more bespoke, and you're looking and saying because logically the problem is going to be a bespoke problem,
Right.
Because so we need to address that thing. So we can't just roll out the standard workshop across the piece. We need to be looking at the underlying dynamics and making sure that it fits in with that. So you've talked there in what somebody might say with quite idealistic terms, right? So if I had to summarize your principles, if I was shoehorning it, and I know there's a lot more nuance in there, but just roll with this for a second. Where you go, it's sort of love thy neighbor territory, right? And I might say to you, the fact, the idea that everything's grounded in love and I'm not allowed to criticize people, that feels kind of a bit idealistic, right? That I have to, effectively, you're saying to me, I need to get on with everybody else. And I know from my real world experience that there are people out there who I struggle to get on with, who I don't, I can't ever see myself getting to that state. How do you respond to that challenge of saying, it's great and I understand it, but it's the kind of thing you might get taught at school. And then, there's this principles you say, or you read someone a religious text, but actually that's quite hard in practice for humans in the real world to do.
So firstly, I wouldn't say that we're saying don't criticize people. We say criticize people from a place of where you would want to be criticized, right? Like if I see you engaging in behavior that is harmful and I don't even think that it's possible for you to change, then why am I criticizing you? Oh, I'm criticizing you to feel good, for my ego to feel good. And I get that. That's a very human thing. But if I'm criticizing you from like, oh, I don't even think it's possible for you to change, then my criticism is literally pointless. I criticize you because I think it's possible for you to change. You criticize me because you think it's possible that I change. We criticize each other. We are critical of each other because we think that by like articulating these criticisms, things can get better. Otherwise, what is the literal point of criticism, right? So that's a slight deviation or description of how I would put it. But also, the human brain is designed to overemphasize the negatives over the positives, right? We are more designed to worry about the threat of a saber-toothed tiger than we are to marvel at the dandelion, right? So what you just said is just like a feature of certain parts of our brain. So that response is not a surprise to me. And At the same time, I would say the way that we have solved problems historically as a species, right, is by believing in the ideal and working towards it. Again, if you're an entrepreneur, why are you an entrepreneur? Like, because you think it is possible to problem solve and create better solutions that advance the human species forward. I'm assuming that's why you became an entrepreneur, because you're actually into solving problems and you believe that we can solve problems in innovative ways. We can solve problems in ways that actually create a sense of, you know, flow state for us, our loved ones, our family members, our friends, and for the society at large. Otherwise, why would you be doing what you're doing? Why are you getting up every day and going to work and doing what you're doing unless you believe that a better future is possible? And it's precisely the mentality that we bring to the theory of enchantment. I'm not telling you anything you don't actually believe in the core of your being. So come on, let's get on with it.
And the bit I find really interesting is if we look back to conflicts
Mm-hmm.
that have been success. So apartheid in South Africa would be a really good example.
Yeah.
Or closer to home for me, Northern Ireland, right? There's been peace there, although that's coming under threat. All of those things have been successful. There's been somebody there that's recognized what you're saying. So Nelson Mandela, who had every reason to detest the people that had jailed him, consciously went out and followed the principles that you're adopting. And so we've seen, I find it amazing when you talk in those terms. It's really interesting because on the one hand, what you're proposing feels quite disruptive relative to the way that most people approach these problems.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you're going back to case that, this has been tried and tested before.
Yeah.
It's been done and it's been done in really challenging situations.
Yeah.
So where we're not, what goes on, yes, it's difficult what goes on within businesses and it's challenging, but it's nowhere near as challenging as you've imprisoned me for decades, right? And treated me really badly, right? Or you've killed members of my family, whatever, right? Really horrible things happen. And that's how we've resolved it. So I really like, as you talk about it, we can point back to people have done this before where there were much bigger things at stake.
Right. That's precisely the case. It's also true for Rwanda, right? In the aftermath of the Rwanda genocide, you had folks who committed genocide being adopted by the family members of those who were slain. You had a really deep reconciliation process that happened in that country. In my own country, in the United States of America, the most successful protest movement in United States history was the civil rights movement, which we get a great deal of our inspiration from, right? Where you had folks like Dr. King saying that the aim and ideal of the civil rights movement is unconditional love. To protest the harm that is being committed by white supremacists while simultaneously demonstrating that you actually love those human beings. You believe those human beings are made in the image of the divine, which is that you believe those human beings are sacred, just as you believe your family members and friends are sacred, right? That transcendent narrative, that transcendent belief is what actually enabled the fall of Jim Crow in the United States of America, desegregation, so on and so forth. So you need a transcendent worldview in order to push these things forward. And this is why we continue to return to teaching people about what it means to be human, right? On a scientific basis, on a spiritual basis, on an artistic basis, if you want to call like the Disney sort of reference that. Like, again, there's a reason why we gravitate towards these teachings in pop culture. They reveal to us something very true, profound, and sacred about what it means to be human. And if we can get to that, if we can speak from that level, from that root, which, by the way, what the word radical actually means, it means to get at the root of things. If we can speak from that place, we can move our species forward. I really increasingly take a species-wide lens when analyzing these particular problems, and time is of the essence as far as I'm concerned. So,
right, and you just speak with this tremendous passion for what you do, right, and this kind of really clear belief that one, what you're proposing is feasible, it's possible.
yeah,
But two, you've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and my sense is that the reason you're able to articulate so clearly what you believe in view is that this is not something that you've kind of created overnight, right? You've been working. Your dedication to looking at this subject, I'm really fascinated where that comes from, and that brings us neatly to sort of talking about you and your story,
yeah,
because you're trying to do an amazing thing, but you're having to fight. There's a lot of opposition to this. There's a lot of vested interest in and that's commercial vested interest, but it's also sort of cognitive vested interest. People don't want to. This sounds a bit hard. Talk us a little bit about what got you into this and what drives you.
When I was 14 years old, I saw a really beautiful film called Freedom Riders, which I don't know if you've seen this film. It's a true story about a woman named Erin Gruwell, the teacher in California. And she's teaching during a time of what's known as the LA riot in United States history. And during the LA riots, you had race-based gangs essentially fighting each other. And she is teaching a classroom of 10th graders, 15-year-old kids, all of different races and backgrounds who all hate each other, right? And they're not interested in learning, Homer's The Odyssey because they hate each other. And they're living in like lower class families as well. So their material needs are not being met. The adults in their lives are either also part of the gangs or are showing up in ways that are fundamentally distrustful, right? And so Erin Gruwell dedicates herself to building a classroom that is truly inclusive and belonging. And she does so in part by teaching the kids how much they actually have in common. There's a really famous scene where she puts a piece of tape on the ground in the classroom, and she says things like, "Come to the line if you've lost family and friends in this war." And of course, inevitably, even though these people come from different backgrounds, almost all of them come to the line. And it turns out that they all have this transcendently felt experience of loss, right? And she continues, "Come to the line if you have members, if you've ever been to prison." And they all come to the line. "Come to the line if have family members who are in prison," so on and so forth. And they realize that although they thought they had nothing in common, they have so much in common. And eventually she engages them in this writing practice where they're constantly expressing, which means to press outward, right? Expressing their lived experiences. And she reads these things, the bond as a student group. And of course, increasingly, their reading comprehension skills increase. Isn't that weird how that happens, right? These markers that are measured in the school system, their test scores improve. All these things start to improve. Why? Because they feel like they're coming to a space where they are included and where they belong. If you get that part right, the other parts fall into place. So I saw this movie when I was 14 years old, and I was like, I was struck because what it seemed to me that Erin Gruwell was doing was magic. To take people who hate each other, right? Who don't just disagree with each other, but who hate each other and who family members have been deeply wounded by each other. To create that system where they are literally transformed and they begin to really perceive themselves as sacred. Because again, like if you're living in this environment, you are thinking no one cares about you. So you can be very flippant with your life, right? You can be very fickle with your life. Which means acting recklessly, right? Which influences the gang lifestyle and informs the gang lifestyle. You gravitate towards your gang in the first place because your gang is providing a sense of family, providing a sense of inclusion and belonging, right? That's why you feel such a strong loyalty to that gang in the first place. Well, what happens if an English teacher starts to build that for you and for the people that you despise? It creates cognitive dissonance,
Right.
right? But it also creates a new space for inclusion and belonging. So now you don't have to overcompensate for the lack of it by projecting all your insecurities onto other people. And again, I saw this when I was 14 years old. I was like, that's magic. I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And so that, we talk about that film when we studied that film in the Theory of Enchantment online course. That film was like the first instance, the first pop culture reference that I saw that blew me away. That I was like, whoa, something wondrously wild is happening in the human condition. And more people need to know about this. More people need to know that this is possible.
And talk a little bit about your background, because there's some fascinating dynamics again that I think are relevant to you getting to where you've got to.
Sure. So I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was raised in an atypical Christian family that observed Jewish holidays. What that means, I want you to imagine growing up in a deeply Catholic town, right? New Orleans is very Catholic, but I grew up in a pretty much anti-Catholic church that didn't observe any mainstream Christian holidays. So no Christmas, no Easter, right? But observed Jewish holidays. So Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, so on and so forth. So my sense of time and space was very much mediated by Jewish culture. Naturally developed a aversion or an allergy, you might say, to anti-Semitism. Fast forward a number of years, ended up majoring in international studies with a concentration in conflict and diplomacy. Studied the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is popping off right now, and you might say, and developed the theory of enchantment in response to that conflict initially. The initial principles of the theory of enchantment were treat Israelis and Palestinians like human beings, not political abstraction. Right? If you want to criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down any of the communities in this conflict, and root everything you do in loving compassion. So the theory of enchantment originally, I mean, it's an amalgamation. I can't really say that there's a specific point in time where it emerged, but it emerges certainly in part as a response to that particular conflict. And the first principle of the theory of enchantment, just actually like is a really beautiful uh encapsulation of what I mean. I'll expound upon this as it relates to that conflict in particular. It might be helpful. So treat Israelis and Palestinians like human beings, not political abstraction. One of the things that's happening in the conflict is Israelis and Palestinians are being perceived as symbols. There's a self-reflection question that we ask in one of our training platforms. And the self-reflection question is, right about the time you saw another person or another group of people as a symbol for good or bad, not an actual human being, right? So depending upon who you ask, and this goes back to the oppressed paradigm, right, that has been permeating our discourse for the past 4 years. Depending upon who you ask, Israelis are symbols of light and Palestinians are symbols of darkness. And if you ask another group of people, Israelis are symbols of darkness and Palestinians are symbols of light. No one's actually engaging, or I shouldn't say no one, but many people are not actually engaging with the people in the conflict as human beings. They're engaging with them as though they were symbols. They're engaging with them as though they were political abstraction, right? And so you can see how the language or the principles that we designed comes from my wrestling with that conflict. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about me. And of course, my obsession with pop culture, I think, just speaks for itself. In my own spare time, I'm a singer, I'm a dancer, I'm a lover of the art. I think that wisdom is timeless. And so if wisdom is timeless, we should expect to see it in contemporary form. And I think pop culture is that repository, is that contemporary form of wisdom, which is why I can see it and how it emerges in Disney films and, music by some of our pop culture artists that we love, like John Mayer and Lil Wayne and Kendrick Lamar and Fleetwood Mac. And I'm just listing artists that are part of the Theory of Enchantment online course. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
I love that. And does this still feel like work in progress for you? Because you've got your principles there, which and I love the fact that you're honest in that, because a lot of people would say almost like it came to me in a vision, right? Overnight I switched these things on, right? And we know the reality is, right, it would have taken years of reflection and
Right.
and this presumably is an ongoing process as you learn more as you do these things.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I guess that points to your theory, because I have a sense of you've got a very strong purpose and sense of direction, and you know what you want to do with this. The
Mhm.
mission is very, very clear.
Mhm.
And you're running lots of experiments, I guess,
Yeah.
in terms of the
That's
work
where
that
the
you're doing.
theory comes in, right? That's where the
Right.
theory.
Right. And so how much is that evolve? I mean, the core presumably remains fairly static, but as you're discovering, I guess, what works and what doesn't, to put it in simple terms, how much of that is evolving, and how fluid is this, I guess?
Well, it's constantly evolving because we use design thinking to design our products and services. So for example, if we have a company where their managers, we want to put their managers, let's say, in our online course, but every lesson of the online course takes 45 minutes to get through, and they don't actually have time to do that, then we'll iterate based on their survey responses and say, okay, we're just going to do 6 minute like habit training uh on a daily basis for 9 weeks, which we now have a product that does that, right? Because surely you can find 6 minutes in your day to respond to a self-reflection question. And we're going to see if by the end of going through that experience, because what is self-reflection doing? It's presenting you with a question or two every day. And the idea is that if you do this every day, you'll be more comfortable living the question. You'll be more comfortable being curious, right? And you'll be less filled with the feelings of insecurity when grappling with your own issues. And you'll also see that other people will be taking that same journey with you. And you'll bring that into being when conflict inevitably erupts, in the workplace. So all of that is to say, we are constantly involved in an iterative process, a co-created process with our partners. So yeah, the process is the point. And I think that's something that, let's say, companies who have brought in older or different like bad DEI like training programs, is that they misapprehended the fact that, like, it's not a checked box. It's not about checking a box, because ultimately what we're talking about is human beings. Human beings are organisms. We're organisms, right? It's not like we're not like a fixed point. We're organisms. We're constantly growing, constantly becoming, constantly being. That's what it means to be a being. And so to switch your mindset from, "Oh, I just need to check this box," to, "No, the process is the point." To be in the process and to surrender to the process, which does take time. It does take training to switch to that, mentality, and it takes me training. I'm still in training. Sometimes I wish things would go faster, right? And I just have to learn how to surrender to the process. But that is where the magic happens. That's where the enchantment starts to emerge.
And I love the way you talk about it as a sort of, I don't think you use this word, but I think it's sort of with someone as a kind of a journey. And the
Mhm,
interesting thing, I think, comparing and contrasting some of these ineffective techniques where it's like, come on a course, job done.
mhm.
My sense with yours is, as you go through the process, is that there will be small moments of learning as we go, right? So there
Mhm.
might be certain questions that are more that have a bigger resonance for certain individuals, and so it's a little bit like, I guess, like learning a language or fitness or any of
Oh,
these
yeah.
things that you're saying to people, keep coming back to it, keep doing it on a regular basis, because there might be small incremental wins. There'll be some moments where it feels like you're succeeding. There'll be moments where probably that are less, but it's like anything else. And so what I like about it is we can almost see this in other aspects of our life. We know what an exercise regime or a diet regime or
Sure.
learning a language, whatever these things are, and you're just bringing something similar to that. So those things work. Not all
Mhm.
of them do, but
Yeah.
but if you want to be successful in that space, you will have to follow that sort of regime to be successful. And that's kind of what you're pointing at, as opposed to a one-shot piece of training where,
Right.
we will just reprogram you in half an hour and the job
Right.
done, right? You're basically you're tapping into some of these other dynamics that we recognize in other contexts.
Yes, exactly. It's a you could say that it's a kind of a lifestyle change. If I wanna move from a heavy red meat based diet to a more vegetarian diet, it's not like I just eat a vegetarian meal once and boom, I'm done. It's like, no, it's a process. It's a process, right? The process is the point. If you can learn to surrender to that mentality, and again, it takes time, you'll be okay. And not only will you be okay, you'll be more likely to thrive, because whatever comes your way, you'll be able to identify certain factors that, let's say, aren't aligned, right? And this goes back to what I said earlier about, like, if you're in conflict with a customer, for example, and you have been practicing using theory of enchantment training to notice when people are trying to discharge pain by blaming you for something, you'll be more inclined to actually respond to the thing that needs to be responded to. And this will expedite the amount of time needed to get to solving the problem that is at hand in front of you, as opposed to wasting time in, like, this, like, "Oh, you said something and you didn't articulate it in a way that resonated with me, and now I'm feeling this kind of pit in my stomach, and now I don't know what to do with it. It's unconscious, so I'm gonna have an attitude towards you now, and I'm gonna discharge my pain that I'm feeling onto you," and then it just becomes the cycle, right? Like, let's optimize to be responding from our higher selves as opposed to our egos. And that's hard. And it takes practice. But over time, we do change. We have seen it. We have many case studies that prove that it works. Right?
One of the so as you describe it, on the one hand, I could see this being quite hard work, right? Because you're asking people to do things that are difficult.
Yeah.
On the other hand, every time I talk to you and every conversation, you are full of joy. And I wondered, how do you square those two things? Because I would have thought, on the one hand, doing what you do is is exhausting, right? Back to your point about you're seeing it because it always struck me that there are certain people that are given lenses that they look at the world through,
Yeah.
and you will spot things other people won't spot, right? Because you're probably looking for them all the time.
Yeah.
And so you will have a heightened sense of awareness of where, I don't know, a song might be pointing in a particular direction. You'll spot it. The rest of us won't, right? Because we're not attuned to that, but
Yeah.
also we're not spending our time thinking about it in that way. So on the one hand, I could see this being incredibly exhausting for you personally. On the other hand, every time I speak to you, you just seem really happy and smiley. And I just wondered, is it exhausting for you, or is this because this is your real purpose in life? Like my sense is it just a joyful experience to go through this?
Yes, the process itself produces joy because the process is producing within people a state of grace. And what do I mean by that? The word grace is related to the word gratitude and gratefulness. These words are all interconnected, etymologically speaking. So to be in a state of grace is to be able to give thanks for everything as it is emerging, which is, what I mean by surrendering to the process. And so the very first practice that we introduce people to in the Theory of Enchantment is called the Who Am I practice, where we have people ask themselves, Who am I? And then for everything that comes up, say thank you, including the things that you don't like about yourself, including the things that you're like a little, afraid to look at or acknowledge about yourself. And that actually matters because that's the antidote to projecting your insecurities onto another human being. If you can actually give thanks for everything that you are, everything that you are becoming, including the insecurity that you experience, which are just a part of life itself, then you will actually respond from a state of joy and from a state of grace. And it isn't to say that like when you experience pain and suffering, it won't be painful. It will be painful. But the ability to give thanks even for that, because it's part of what it means to be alive and a part of what it means to be human, actually produces the opposite of exhaustion, right? It produces a place from which you can renew yourself. It's like a constant fountain of renewal. And imagine a whole team of people working from that. That's incredible. Like, why wouldn't you want to make your team be able to operate from that perspective or from that state?
I love that. Wow. I think, Chloé, that is I could keep talking to you forever and we will have further conversations, no doubt. But I think that's just the perfect. If people want to find out more about the Theory of Enchantment, where should they go?
They should go to theoryofenchantment.com and connect with us, partner with us. We want to work with as many partners as possible. So check out theoryofenchantment.com. There's also a feature-long piece that was written in Atlantic Magazine. If you look up, I have the title here, actually. If you look
I
up,
will put a link to this in the show notes, but
yes,
read it to us anyway.
The title is Can Chloé Sell Skeptics on DEI? A feature-length article in Atlantic Magazine. And again, visit us at theoryofenchantment.com. We would love to be of service to you and your team.
Amazing. Listen, I say this to all my guests, but I genuinely, in this case, really, really mean it. You are somebody that has massively inspired me. I love the way your brain works. I love the fact that it's academically rigorous, but you've connected, you know how to connect to people, right? And I think that popular culture thing is so important in what you're doing. And I love the fact that you have solved a problem for me, which is all the DE&I stuff that I've experienced has been terrible.
Yeah.
Right? It's just been not looking, and it's been dishonest and not solving the problem. And I love that you've come along and grappled with that and found an intelligent human way to do it. So I just want to say, keep going, keep doing what you're doing, keep spreading the word. But above all, thank you for being an amazing guest on the show.
Thank you, Christian. Pleasure to be with you today.
So that's it for this episode of the show. My enormous thanks to you for listening and to Chloé for appearing. To find out more about Chloé and her work at the Theory of Enchantment, check out the show. It's where you'll find resources that are relevant to what we discussed. If you've missed the previous episodes featuring Chloé, Morgan Hamill, and Peter Stein, or the individual episode with Morgan, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there as well. If this is your first time listening to the show, where have you been? You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It is available on all of the major platforms. And if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could leave a review and let me know your thoughts. That really helps because it means I can continue to attract high quality guests like Chloé. To discover past episodes of the show that you might have missed, visit humanriskpodcast.com. I will be back very soon with another episode of this show. But in the meantime, stay safe, Take a moment to reflect on your own light and shadow and maybe see how embracing both can help you engage more meaningfully with others. But above all, thank you so much for listening.